we have penicillin. Now, if Alexander Fleming, a Washington scientist, had not discovered penicillin, the first antibiotics in 1928, we would probably still be dying from things like stomach ulcers, strep throat, scarlet fever, staph infections, Lyme disease, and leptospirosis, and things like that. Our next life-changing scientific breakthrough was discovery of electricity. The life-changing discovery of electricity is attributed to the English scientist Michael Faraday. His main discoveries included the principles underlying electromagnetic induction, diamagnetism, and electrolysis. Faraday's experiments also created the first generator, which was the forerunner of the huge generators that produce our electricity today. Okay, now let's look at DNA. Many people believe that American biologist James Watson and English physicist Francis Crick discovered DNA in the 1950s, but in fact it was first identified in the late 1860s by Swiss chemist Friedrich Miescher. Then, in the decades following Miescher's discovery, other scientists carried out many research studies that helped us understand how organisms pass on their genes and how the workings of cells are governed. We've all heard about the theory of relativity, so yeah, encompassing two interrelated theories by Albert Einstein, special relativity and general relativity, the theory of relativity, published in 1905, completely transformed theoretical physics and astronomy during the 20th century, superseding a 200-year-old theory of mechanics created primarily by Newton. This theory became the foundation for much of modern science. Now, I'm sure we all know this thing. The periodic table, right? In the year 1869, Russian chemist Dmitry Mendeleev, he noticed that when arranged by atomic weight, the chemical elements lined up to form groups with smaller properties. With this knowledge, he was able to create the first periodic table, one of the most important discoveries in chemistry. Now, this next scientific breakthrough is a bit of a controversial one because there's still a lot of debate about this, and that is the theory of evolution by natural selection. Inspired by an observation that he made on the second survey voyage of the Beagle in 1831 to 1836, Charles Darwin began to develop what later became known as the theory of evolution by natural selection, the key mechanism of evolution. And regardless of whether or not you believe natural selection is scientific, it's no doubt that this has really shifted the course of science on our world today. Now let's take a look at some breakthroughs from the 21st century. Scientists successfully edited the first human embryo ever in the United States in July 27, 2017. Researchers in Portland, Oregon have achieved a significant breakthrough in gene editing technology. Taking advantage of the revolutionary gene editing technique, CRISPR, a gene linked to heart conditions, was successfully deleted from a human embryo. Now, our eighth breakthrough is that scientists discovered an alien planet that's the best candidate for life as we know it. Scientists at the European Organization for Astronomical Research, or the ESO, found the best candidate for extraterrestrial life for human beings. The super-Earth named LHS 1140b was found in the habitable zone of a dim star 40 light years away from Earth. It receives about half as much sunlight from its star, LHS 114, as the Earth does from the sun. I mean, this is just fascinating stuff, so let's just keep it going. Alright, next up we have gravitational waves that proves Einstein's theory of general relativity. Albert Einstein's theory of general relativity states that space and time are unified in one continuum, usually commonly referred to as the space-time continuum. Objects in the universe, no matter their size, warp space-time as they move, creating ripples known as gravitational waves. Until recently, however, that theory was just that, theory. But new technological advances allow astrophysicists to measure the massive gravitational waves created by huge objects in deep space. Usually these come from black holes and neutron stars millions and millions of light years away, so their waves are incredibly faint by the time they reach Earth. And the final scientific breakthrough I want to look at is the scientists are one step closer to growing human organs in pigs. So check this. Scientists at the Salk Institute for Biological Studies in California said they're one step closer to being able to grow human organs inside pigs. Like, this is nuts. So like, in their latest research, they were able to grow human cells inside pig embryos, a small but promising step towards organ growth. You may ask, why would anybody want this research done in the first place? Well, scientists say it could help with studying disease and help develop different drugs. It could be a way to help with human organ donation. Pharmacist John Pemberton was working on a cure for headaches. He was using the main ingredients, coca leaves and cola nuts. His assistant accidentally mixed both with carbonated water, and poof, Coke was invented, and the recipe began to be perfected over the years. Chewing gum is up next. Back in the year 1870, Thomas Adams was experimenting with a South American tree sap called chicle. He planned to use it as a substitute for rubber, but after so many failed experiments, he threw a piece in his mouth and he started to chew on it. He surprisingly liked it and turned it into Chiclet's chewing gum. When it comes to Botox, there was a couple by the name of Alastair and Jean Carruthers. They were using small portions of a toxin to treat crossed eyes, as well as eyelid spasms and other eye muscle disorders. And that's when they noticed that one of the side effects was that wrinkles began to disappear, giving birth to the Botox industry as we know it today. Swiss engineer George de Mestral was out hunting and got annoyed of the burrs sticking to his dog's fur as well as to his socks. He decided to examine the burrs under a microscope and he noticed tiny hooks. George de Mestral experimented for several years, but 20 years later, NASA was actually the ones that popularized Velcro. In at number 6 is Teflon. Chemist Roy Plunkett was trying to create a new type of chlorofluorocarbons, aka CFCs, and now the refrigerated container was supposed to be full of gas, but he found a slippery resin that was resistant to extreme heat and other chemicals instead of the gas. So Roy Plunkett started to experiment with the resin, and now Teflon is used in the military as well as in non-stick pots and pans, among other uses. Saccharin comes in at number 5. In the year 1879, Ira Remsen and Konstantin Fahlberg were working in their lab at the Johns Hopkins University, and Konstantin Fahlberg accidentally spilled a chemical mixture on his hand. He then later noticed a sweet taste of it later on while he was eating, and he secretly decided to patent the mixture without telling Ira Remsen. The zero-calorie sweetener called saccharin can now be found in packets everywhere. Vulcanized rubber is another revolutionary discovery that has changed how we live our lives. In the 1830s, natural rubber had many different uses. However, it wasn't really able to withstand a lot of extreme cold or heat. Chemist Charles Goodyear accidentally dropped some rubber mixed with sulfur on a hot stove. The process of vulcanization was discovered at that moment. Rubber actually hardens when heated with sulfur. The Goodyear Tire Company was named after him 40 years later after he passed away. Leading off the top 3 in this list is X-rays. In 1895, a German physicist named Wilhelm Röntgen was working with cathode rays and noticed that there was some fluorescent cardboard that began to illuminate from the other side of the room. There was a pretty thick screen between the cathode emitter and the cardboard. This showed that light particles could travel through solid objects. He took the first X-ray photo, which was a skeletal image of his wife's hand. Anesthesia was also discovered by accident. Nitrous oxide, aka laughing gas, used to be pretty much something that people would use for fun at parties to laugh like crazy. In 1884, a friend of Horace Wells, an American dentist, accidentally took too much laughing gas and cut his leg pretty badly. He didn't even feel it or even realize that his leg was gashed open like that. From that moment, nitrous oxide became one of the early forms of anesthesia. And at number 1, we have the microwave. In 1945, engineer Percy Spencer was tinkering with a magnetron that emitted microwaves. A chocolate bar in his pocket began to melt, and he realized that this meant that there would be many more uses for this when it came to food. And from there, the microwave oven was born.
Gravity. An Indian mathematician by the name of Aryabhata first discovered the force to explain why objects don't fall when the earth rotates. Another Indian mathematician, Brahmagupta, he described gravity as an attractive force and used the term Gurutvakarshan for gravity. Aryabhata developed a geocentric solar system of gravitation and an eccentric elliptical model of the planets, where the planets spin on their axes and follow the elliptical orbits, the sun and the moon revolving around the earth in epicycles. Next up, number 2 is this. Not the letter O, but the number 0. Now, one thing to note that the digit 0 has always been linked to ancient philosophy of nothingness and is one of the many examples of intermeshing of science and math, along with combining it with spirituality and philosophy in ancient India. Indians, however, were the first to use 0 as a symbol and also in arithmetic operations, although Babylonians used 0 to signify the absent. In those early times, a blank space was used to denote 0. Later, when it created confusion, a dot was used to denote 0. Around the time of 500 AD, when Aryabhata was alive, he then gave the new symbol for 0, which we now know as this. Moving on to binary numbers. Binary numbers were first described by Pingala around 200 BC. Pingala is a traditional name of the author of the Chantasatra, which is the earliest known Sanskrit treatise on prosody. And prosody is the patterns of rhythm and sound used in poetry. Now, for all the people who just love math in school, the decimal system as well as the quadratic system was also created by Indians. It was in the 7th century CE when Brahmagupta found the first general formula for solving quadratic equations. The decimal system, or the Hindu number system, which was a precursor for the Arabic numeric system, was developed in India between the 1st and the 6th century CE. Next up, we have carburized steel. Ancient Indians had mastered the production of high-quality steel more than 2,000 years before the process finally became simplified in Britain and Europe. The legendary Indian wood steel was a source of great wonder to other great civilizations from ancient Greece to Persia, as well as from Arabia to ancient Rome. It was so advanced and so much value was put on it that it was selected by King Porus as a gift over what Alexander the Great offered him, which was gold and silver. Now let's talk about water on the moon. One of the independent India's most notable contributions to modern space exploration happened between 2008 and 2009 with Chandrayaan-1, the Indian Space Research Organization's first dedicated lunar mission. The ISRO's Polar Satellite Launch Vehicle carried both ISRO and NASA instruments, of which the Indian Moon Impact Probe first detected the presence of water on the moon. Now, there's always jokes about this next invention, flushed toilets, because people tease India all the time because of the accessibility issues that they have with toilets. However, flush toilets were first used in the Indus Valley civilization. These existed in most homes and were connected to a sophisticated sewage system. The civilization was very prominent in hydraulic engineering. Now, a lot of what we see printed in this world is due to the invention of ink. Many ancient cultures and civilizations independently discovered and prepared ink for writing purposes. Now, the source of the carbon pigment used in ancient Indian ink, called musi, was Indian. Way back since the 4th century BC, the practice of writing with ink with a sharp-pointed needle was common in South India. Now, all you ladies, I'm telling you, probably would die without this next invention, shampoo. Gotta make that hair shiny and clean. The word shampoo derives from champo. It was initially used as a head massage oil for the Nawabs of Bengal during the Mughal Empire around 1762. It then evolved into shampoo over the years. Now, in every bathroom in every home around the world, we see shampoo. Now let's talk about these little things. Not the mic, but the button. I don't know if you can see it right here. Buttons were first used in Mohenjo-daro for ornamental purposes rather than for fastening pieces of clothing together, you know. Back when they were first used, as I mentioned, in Mohenjo-daro, it was in Indus Valley civilization around 2000 BC.
We got number 10 first, hospitals. So the first modern hospital with nurses and training center and everything was in Cairo. The Ahmed Ibn Tulun Hospital was established established in the year 872, all patients received free healthcare, which was a Muslim tradition that was institutionalized when the hospitals started to become a thing. Now this model would later serve as a template for other hospitals that would appear in different parts of the world. And number 9 is the toothbrush. So Islam places a lot of emphasis on hygiene, and the ancient Egyptians are thought to have chewed on twigs from what's called a toothbrush tree. However, these twigs, also known as miswaka, became known to a lot more people when the Prophet Muhammad started using them regularly to brush his teeth. The Quran does not mention miswak twigs specifically, however many Islamic scholars have mentioned it in their writings. Number 8 brings us magnifying glass as well as glasses. It's grouped together and you'll see why. The scholar Hassan ibn al-Haytham from Basra, Iraq was the first person to describe how the eye actually works. He carried out some experiments with reflective materials and proved that our eyes don't actually emit rays to perceive our environment as it was believed up until then. He also discovered that curved glass surfaces can actually be used for magnification. His glass reading stones were the first magnifying glasses that were ever created, and it was from these that glasses were later developed. So people started wearing them on their face to now see better, increase magnification, and of course that led to telescopes and binoculars, so many other things. An amazing one is also the camera. So Hassan ibn al-Haytham appears again for his revolutionization of optics. So he completely rejected the Greek idea that invisible light rays emitted from our eyes and that caused sight, and he believed that vision was caused by light reflecting off an object and entering our eye. In a genius experiment using a dark room with a pinhole on one side and a white sheet on the other side, he proved this theory. Light came through the pinhole and it projected an inverted image of objects that were outside of the room onto the sheet on the opposite side. He called this the camera, and it was the world's first camera obscura, which we get the term camera from. Clocks come in at number 6. So there was an ingenious man called Al-Jazari from Turkey, and he was a very devout Muslim as well as a highly skilled engineer, and he created the concept of automatic machines. By the year 1206, Al-Jazari had made numerous clocks of all shapes and sizes. So of course, as we need time today to stay on schedule, structure our lives, so did Muslims over 700 years ago. They knew that it was important to know the time so that they can do things like their regular prayers and things like that. So this of course was a revolutionary invention. At number 5, we have surgical instruments. So back in the 10th century, the surgeon Abul Qasim Khalif al-Abad al-Zawahiri, he was a man known in the West as Abu Qasis, and he wrote the Al-Tadrif, his medical encyclopedia, which included a section called On Surgery, and this had a large collection of over 200 surgical tools. Using instruments for surgery was a very revolutionary concept because it actually enabled science to change from just being a speculative theory to something that can be experimental now. His work was the first in history of the medicine to illustrate the use of surgical instruments, and their design have only changed a little bit in 1,000 years. So it were these illustrations that would lay the foundations for surgery in Europe and in other parts of the world. The 4th spot brings us flying machines. So Abbas ibn Firnas, he was the first person to make a real attempt to construct a flying machine and actually fly. In the 9th century, he designed a winged device that looked like a bird costume, and in a trial run that he did in Spain, Firnas flew upward for a few moments before falling right down and breaking his back. His design would be an inspiration for future flying devices and vehicles. At number 3 brings us coffee. So coffee, to a large degree, is the best known of the Muslim world's exports. While it originated in Ethiopia, it soon found its way over to the Red Sea, to the Arabian Peninsula, where it grew in popularity. The legend tells us of an Arab goat herder who noticed their change in mood when the goats ate a certain berry. So he boiled the berries and came up with the first coffee. So yeah, coffee, a very interesting origin story. I know there are some conflicting origin stories out there, but let me know what you think down below. Yeah, Muslim invention or not? This one is probably the one I was a little bit about, but sources do indicate that this was a Muslim invention. Algebra is at number 2. So the word algebra comes from the title of a Persian mathematician and his famous work in the 9th century, and that was called the Kitab al-Jabr wal-i Mugabbala. Muhammad ibn Musa Khwarazm introduced the beginnings of algebra, and it was a revolutionary move away from the Greek concept of mathematics, which was for the most part based on geometry. He also was the first person to introduce a concept of raising a number to a power. And in at number 1, we have the modern standing army. The first modern standing army was developed by the Ottoman Empire. While technically speaking, a slave army in the early days in Europe was thought to be the first standing army, but of course other standing armies did exist as well in the past, like the Romans and the Spartan armies, for example. However, unlike other armies before them, the Janissary soldiers were actually paid a regular income, and they were, however, forbidden to marry and engage in any type of trade. They would later become famed and known for their internal cohesion, their strict discipline, as well as their fighting skills. By the 17th century, their power would grow so much to a level that they were able to become what's called kingmakers in the Ottoman Empire, and then they were later disbanded. The laser. On May 16, 1960, Jewish-American physicist Theodore Maiman, he fired the first laser. However, his work was based on theoretical foundations first established by Albert Einstein, who was also Jewish, in 1917. Today, the laser is used widely in our everyday devices like barcode scanners and even DVDs. Also, specialized tools are used to mark targets and measure speed, all because of the laser. The name laser is actually an acronym, and I did not know this. I just found out when doing research for this video. It's an acronym for light amplification by stimulated emission of radiation. Now you guys know as well. Moving on to number 9, we have the pacemaker and defibrillators. Jewish-American cardiologist Paul Zoll, he helped in the invention of pacemakers and defibrillators. These inventions are life-saving, and they're huge accomplishments in the world of science. So a pacemaker, when it's inserted in the human body, it helps regulate the heartbeat, while defibrillator restarts the heart in the case of an irregular heartbeat and other heart problems. For anyone suffering from heart condition, these inventions are medical miracles that were so desperately needed. Coming in at the number 8 spot is genetic engineering. In 1972, Jewish-American scientist Paul Berg created the first recombinant DNA molecules, which are responsible for modern genetic engineering. Now, this invention has faced a lot of controversy because of the harmful effects that the food items can have, which are produced through genetic engineering. But on the other hand, genetic engineering has shown that it might be an effective way to treat cancer. But also, this procedure has been used for mass production of insulin and also to help crops become disease resistant. From there, we look at stainless steel at number 7. Hans Goldschmidt, who was a German Jewish chemist, he invented the process for producing carbon-free chromium in the year 1893 and patented the thermite reaction in the year 1895. Now, this discovery was very important for the development of stainless steel, which is an alloy with a high chromium content and low carbon content. Scientists were able to begin producing stainless steel in the early 1900s thanks to Goldschmidt's invention. This steel is not like ordinary steel, and it's very strong enough to fight corrosion. And of course, kitchen appliances made of stainless steel, they're very common and present in almost every household now. Number 6 takes us to a very famous equation, E equals mc squared. Mass energy equivalence is the mass of an object and its energy concept. So this same formula was the one used in the creation of the atomic bomb. However, long before the atomic bomb was conceived, Jewish physicist Albert Einstein was the first to propose that mass energy equivalence is a fundamental principle in the symmetries of space and time. Next up, at number 5, cholera and bubonic vaccination. By the late 1800s, no vaccine for the lethal diseases cholera and bubonic plague existed. Though Jews were historically blamed for the 1300s Black Death outbreaks, well, Jewish bacteriologist Waldemar Hafkini, he decided that he would not let that stop him from developing a cure for cholera and the bubonic plague. So what did he do? He got to work on developing vaccines for these diseases. He tested these vaccines on himself by putting himself in danger. So this guy was very brave as well. In the year 1893, he even relocated to India for 30 years to be closer to the source of the outbreaks. Bubonic plague, also known as Black Death, caused the most deadly disease outbreak in history. In the 19th century, when huge global trade was really booming, cholera was given the ability to spread to almost every single part of the earth. So luckily, we had these vaccines now. Moving on now to number 4, polio vaccine. So the Austrian Jewish biologist Karl Landensteiner, he began working on identifying the biological pathogen that caused polio and was successful in the year 1908. In the 1940s and the 1950s, Jonas Salk, who is a Jewish medical researcher, he spent 7 years developing a vaccine for polio. Now, polio, which is short for poliomyelitis, is an infectious disease that can cause paralysis. Trying to say poliomyelitis, 3 times fast. I could see why they just say polio. But either way, this disease, it first appeared in Europe and then it made its way to the United States. Then in the 19th century, polio became the most dreaded disease, especially for children, infecting hundreds of thousands of people. Now, the vaccine was finally discovered in the year 1955 after involving over 1 million school children. And it has since reduced the number of polio victims to just under 1,000 per year. Salk, he refused to patent the vaccine because he didn't want to profit from saving people's lives. Number 3 brings us nuclear weapons. Robert Oppenheimer, who is a Jewish American theoretical physicist, is known as the father of the atomic bomb for his work on the Manhattan Project, which developed the first nuclear weapons. After World War II, Oppenheimer went to work opposing the spread of nuclear weapons, eventually becoming the chief advisor to the UN group that was tasked with regulating nuclear technology. Now, in the year 1945, America had dropped the first nuclear bombs over Hiroshima and Nagasaki in Japan. As a result, the United Nations, they swiftly moved to develop regulations for the new dangerous technology, hoping that these two events would be the first and the last time that nuclear weapons were used in a war. However, as a result of the Cold War, both the Soviet Union and the United States, they engaged in what is known as the nuclear arms race, which has had massive impacts on the world, and it led to now several other countries being suspected of being in possession of nuclear weapons, and some countries have actually been confirmed to have nuclear weapons. From there, let's look at capitalism. Not the invention of capitalism, but the revolutionization of capitalism. Jewish political economist David Ricardo made major contributions to capitalism. In the 5th century, with the end of feudalism, different forms of capitalism began to become the economic systems of the Western world. Now, this system runs on profits made in a market economy and is still used today all over the world. Now, David Ricardo, he was an 18th century English economist that was renowned for his contributions to economic theory. He developed the comparative advantage theory as well as the labor theory of value and also the theory of rents, which founded other schools of thought and now forms the basis of current economics globally. Now, at number 1, let's talk about Google. Don't be evil is the company's motto, which is shared by both Larry Page and Sergey Brin, who are 2 Jewish co-workers who founded Google while they were both students at Stanford University. Google was founded in the year 1998. Now, at first, no one
was able to understand or even predict the impact that this search engine was going to have on the internet and on the world at large. Now, due to the wide range of products it produces, including Gmail, Drive, Google Home, things like that, Google is no longer just recognized as a search engine. It's a very powerful company. And Google also oversees the creation of the Android operating system, which powers all Android mobile devices. And they own YouTube, which is the website that you're probably watching this video on right now. Definitely changed the world.